Question for you. What's the most important innovation in Magic design in the last 3 years? Is it perhaps the keyword counters introduced in Ikoria, allowing for more flexibility with evergreen keywords? Maybe it's these planeswalkers with static abilities, a change so impactful that it's already been used multiple times since War of the Spark. Maybe it's sagas, modal DFCs, or even the return of phasing. All good answers, but today I want to present an answer that might not have been your first thought, and I want to try and convince you that this is what you should be excited about for Magic's future. I'm talking, of course, about historic. Historic is a word that describes any artifact, legendary card or saga, and it encourages you to build decks jam-packed with them. It appeared in Dominaria, where there are 23 cards that do historic stuff, including making them cheaper, giving them flash, discarding them as a cost, or most commonly, casting them for an effect. In a preview article, Mark Rosewater mentions that he stumbled onto Historic almost by accident while trying to solve a separate issue with the set. He says, "It wasn't a traditional keyword, and it wasn't a keyword action. It was something new. I didn't have time to worry about figuring out what it was. I just pushed ahead and tried it out." As far as the rules were concerned, it was something new, something that was nicknamed batching. At the time, Historic was well received. Despite some initial skepticism, players soon understood how it was the glue that held everything, meaning the set's themes, together. Unlike Mutate or Adventures, Historic is not a splashy, exciting mechanic, but the reason I think it's so important is that it helps solve a problem that's been cropping up in Magic design for years. The problem with Parasites. So, in Magic, different mechanics care about different parts of the game. Milling cares about the number of cards in your library, flying cares about blockers, domain cares about your lands. But some mechanics are more specific than others. Take horsemanship. Cards with horsemanship can only be blocked by other cards with horsemanship. We call this a parasitic mechanic because it only interacts with a very narrow set of cards. And you might be thinking, well, is flying a parasitic mechanic? After all, flying and horsemanship do exactly the same thing, give or take a reach. But we don't consider flying parasitic because it appears in every set, whereas horsemanship only appeared in one. Another example is the Splice onto Arcane mechanic from Kamigawa. This was really parasitic because in order to get any payoff, you needed to specifically fill your decks with arcane spells and spells with Splice. The arcane subtype is otherwise totally meaningless. That is parasitic design. A parasitic mechanic isn't bad by default, but too many of them are unhealthy for the game as a whole. Ideally, cards would be relevant even outside their own set, and parasitic mechanics cut off that part of the game from every other part. But they're hard to avoid altogether. They're still being made as recently as Throne of Eldraine with food tokens, and one of the reasons is that parasitic mechanics are better for tying a set's themes together. Food, horsemanship, and arcane all feel intrinsic to their respective planes because they strongly reflect their themes. This is a case where their insularity, their parasitic nature, is a positive. So if you want to avoid parasitic mechanics, you need to find a way to make other mechanics that feel just as resonant. I think batching is the solution, and since Historic is the first batching mechanic to make it to print, let's make it our use case. So firstly, Historic is not remotely parasitic. All 3 of the things it batches together have been used in future sets, and 2 of them are used all the time. Playing any of these Historic Matters cards from Dominaria doesn't confine you to filling your deck with other cards from Dominaria. Indeed, as new legends and artifacts are released, these old cards can be re-evaluated. That's a good thing because it means that these cards are part of the Magic ecosystem. At the same time though, Historic manages to convey all the themes of the set, keeping it from feeling as generic as something like Kicker that could appear on any plane. Dominaria was all about history, and the 3 components of the batch represented ancient objects, figures, and stories all in one. For all the jokes about this shard of broken glass being passed down from generation to generation, the power of batching means that you're more inclined to consider the flavour of your cards in the first place. So Historic worked, and the data we have about the set's reception backs that up. But what are the odds that we'll see batching again? Well, they tried to batch mystical cards in Throne of Eldraine. That was going to be enchantments, artifacts, and fairies. In the end, they kept the artifacts and enchantments theme, but they dropped the fairies and therefore didn't bother batching it. But this year, batching made its return in Zendikar Rising in the form of the party mechanic. It's not used exactly the same way as Historic, it's a counting mechanic that cares about these 4 specific creature types, but again, it manages to express the themes of the set while keeping the cards relevant to both the past and the future of Magic. What I think Party really demonstrates is that batching can be so much more than just a clone of Historic. Design space refers to the total number of possible mechanics that exist within Magic, and batching has opened up whole new areas of design space. Because it's not a keyword or an ability word, a batch can have whatever triggers or payoffs fit the theme of the set. They might not seem flashy, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of future sets held together by mechanics like Historic and Party. It's flexible, it's flavorful, and, thank God, it's not parasitic.